Welcome back to the Movement Professional Podcast. Today I'm joined by a friend of mine, colleague, Dr. John Herting. How you doing today, John?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well. So John and I met a while back. God, it's got to be at least a decade now that we
Yeah.
met. I think in continuing it. I think I have my SFMA on the wall here, 2016. I think that's
Is
the
that
first time we met. Yeah.
is
So
that where we
come.
met? SFMA?
I had heard about you
Oh,
beforehand from
okay.
Caitlin Kirkpatrick. If
Yeah.
she, I was working with her at some point. She's like, "You got to meet this guy. You guys are so like-minded." And I think we finally met at that SFMA.
Okay.
But it was like we already had an introduction.
hmm
Yeah, and from that point on, like I remember just like saying, "Oh yeah, we're very like-minded," and I feel like I've taken your lead over the years. Like whatever continuing ed you were doing, you were always like a step ahead. I was following. And
hmm
it took a while to realize like, oh, I gotta like listen to this guy and make sure like I'm following what he does because he's on the right track. But yeah, we sometimes we get out of touch, but I always enjoy talking to you. So give your
Yeah.
introduction of what you're doing with yourself right now and the business that you're running. I know it's always growing and very impressive, but the work is always high quality.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Chris. It's so funny. Like, even though we haven't talked in a while, I've still been kind of like keeping an eye on you because I miss you. I
Likewise.
was telling you, like, I miss the connection. I feel like just life with the pandemic screwed stuff up, and then like we're becoming the old guard. We're in our 40s now, and we've been
Yeah,
doing it for a while, and we're leaders because we own businesses. So like
right.
it's interesting over the last year or two for me to realize like now people are looking up to us, and you start to see like our tree growing and who we've mentored and who they're starting their own businesses now, and it's an interesting kind of perspective now as we kind of take that leadership position in the field, which is interesting.
I agree.
Um, but yeah, so thank you again. My name is Dr. John Herting. I have been the owner of Precision Performance Physical Therapy for, I mean, we're on our fourth year now. We have two clinics, one in Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania, and one in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And we continue to grow with staff, with some of our continuing education offerings, but we're really in this phase of delivering high quality insurance based care, and still trying to lead and show people that it can be done, and making sure people continue to achieve high quality outcomes in an insurance based model for sure.
Absolutely. And one of
Yeah.
the unique things about your practice still is like a lot of the therapists that I speak with are have kind of gone out of the insurance model. Still take insurance and you still run a really high quality practice. So
Mhm.
if you can like what are some of the standards you have when as you're growing too and you're hiring more people that you are able to keep a high level of care as you get a little bit bigger and you still stay within that insurance model?
Yeah, I just think we have to hire really high quality individuals. So we're very slow to hire, and the people that we hire are very driven in continue. They want to make sure they maintain a standard of education for themselves, which then relates to how they are educating their patients, which then relates to the standard of care that they're giving. And from an owner standpoint, we need to keep our costs low comparatively because we don't want costs to in a model where insurances are reimbursing less and less every year. Employees want to make more and more every year. We need to make sure that our systems are airtight to make sure our costs are low, because we don't want it to get to the point where in a lot of the larger numbers driven national physical therapy type companies, they're very numbers driven, and the therapists are expected to see, I don't know what you've heard, but I've heard anywhere from 60 to 80, 90 visits a week, right?
Yeah.
That's never an expectation for our therapists. The expectation is just have a full week of 40 to 50 clients. If they want to put in extra hours, they get paid accordingly, but so they can push it to the 60. But then even then I start to have conversations with them about like, let's make sure your quality of life, like you're making the money that you want to make, but your quality of life stays, you have a good work life balance, because I don't want you to burn out, and I want to make sure that we can balance the quality of life that physical therapists seem to lose as they burn out because they're seeing too much volume. So I guess to come back to the point, I think it's managing quality of life for our therapists. It's not having expectations where they feel like they're being stressed and they're burning out because there's high expectations of numbers.
Hmm.
And it's making sure our systems are managed so that we can keep our costs low, um, while ensuring a high quality of care.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, like if you were to, and you could think of this from a hiring perspective, or just if you had, say, a family member that was coming to you looking for physical therapy, but maybe they were too far away to get treated directly,
Mhm.
what is it that you would look for in, a high quality physical therapist or movement professional at large that even if you don't know the person, you can say like, oh, these are some common threads that I would look for to
Mhm.
see if that's the right person, and also on the other side of it, if you know to get out of there really quickly because they're not giving you that high quality care.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key points you said there was movement professional, Chris, because I think both you and I would agree that there's some strength coaches and personal trainers out there that are better than a lot of the physical therapists that we know or we see coming out of schools initially. The difference is they just don't have the manual skills, maybe, but exercise programming and prescription wise and cueing wise, there's a lot of trainers and strength coaches that can get similar results without
Hmm.
putting their hands on you.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I think when you're looking at a movement professional as a whole, I think you're looking at somebody that treats the body as a system, that can see. I think you and I are similar, and we look at movement in patterns. So whether it's
Hmm.
like an upper body push pull pattern, a lower body push pull pattern, rotational movements, gait patterns, and then how different positions influence those patterns. I think if you find a physical therapist or a strength coach or a personal trainer who's looking at the body that way, I think you're on the right track, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you walk into either a fitness studio or a physical therapy office and you see lots of table exercise where they're um, like specific muscle driven, for instance, what I'm picturing right now is like a side lying straight leg raise,
Hmm.
right? Or lots of time spent on a table stretching, whether
Right.
it's you're stretching yourself or a physical therapist or trainer is stretching you. I think those are kind of my red flags. Now, I think there's certain populations where that may be more appropriate, but I think in general, a good trainer, a good performance coach, a good physical therapist is having people get up, move, work in patterns, and think about the body's position and how they influence those patterns to get the change that you need, whether it's to relieve pain or to push like a specific fitness protocol.
Absolutely. And I think like what you're alluding to there with the movement professional idea is that there's a versatility there too, right? So somebody who is a physical therapist, but also you could tell is very understanding of the strength and conditioning field or has done some work in that field.
Mhm.
There's a versatility of the methods that they're using. I think that shows you a lot of things without getting to know somebody is that one, there's a will and a drive to learn more, right? Because it takes a lot to just go through physical therapy school. But if you go
Mhm.
through physical therapy school and you've also gotten into the world of strength and conditioning, you've taken maybe your CSCS or some type of personal training certification, you've gone through that process, but you also could see in, certifications don't necessarily mean a lot in themselves, but you could see what somebody has done from a continuing education process just through, a list of some of the methods they've been at. And I think the more versatile that is for me, the more confident I'm going to have that someone's not going to be really, really like hardlined on one method, that they're going to be
Mhm.
able to be flexible enough to go, whatever somebody needs, I got something for you.
Mhm.
So I think that versatility is the thing I tend to look at more and more because it definitely demonstrates like a will to learn more and not
Yeah.
feel like I've already learned it all. So that terminology of movement professional, I think it incorporates that because I know when I was in school, and I'm sure it was the same for you, there tended to be like a little bit of a turf war where it's like physical therapists, like we do this, that's our scope. A chiropractor does this, not our scope, and they shouldn't
Mhm.
be messing with our, coming into our turf, right? And I just found that so unnecessary and actually quite harmful, where it just became like you start to profile a profession as opposed to a
Mhm.
professional and like actually see like what the professional does. And I know that I've learned a lot from all different professionals over the years, strength coaches, chiropractors, right? And I think it's cool to just open, your mind to more professionals and just get a sense of like that versatility there is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Well, I think you and I have worked ourselves into this world of movement-based therapy, right? Like,
Hmm.
yes, we have some manual skills that maybe a personal trainer doesn't have, but there's more commonality between, and maybe this is just the world that we live in, where we live in a world, most of the courses we have taken, there's been personal trainers and strength coaches and chiropractors and physical therapists in it, right?
Absolutely.
And to allude to the kind of turf war that you've said, like it's a pet peeve when someone says, "Well, I have to go do my physical therapy exercises."
Right.
Like, who's this? Like, that's almost a negative connotation on a certain type of exercise. But in reality, it's a gray area in a continuum of movement where,
Hmm.
a personal trainer can teach an elderly woman to sit up and down off the toilet just like as we would, right? And
Hmm.
a strength coach can teach someone to squat 500 pounds just like we would, right? And
Yeah.
it's where do we plug and play that client into the standard of movement? And I think that's what you're looking for when you're looking for a movement professional, whether for performance or to ease pain, is do they look at exercise in that fashion? Do they look at
Absolutely.
it again as patterns and on this continuum of, a squat is sitting onto a toilet or it's 500 squatting 500 pounds. But
Right.
where do we plug that person in? And if it's someone that squats 500, but they're having pain, so they can only squat, they can't body weight squat. Well, how do I work position and working in patterns to get them back up to that 500 pounds level? Right.
Absolutely.
Um, and same thing if like, and for that person, they're still probably strong, but pain's limiting their ability to squat heavy. So what
Right.
position is going to help them get back to where they need to be? Right.
Yeah.
For the grandmother who's trying to sit on a toilet, maybe strength is what strengthens some like cardiovascular and general conditioning work is what she needs. But it's just what do they need on the continuum of movement to make sure they can, um, work in an efficient manner based on their needs is what
100%.
we're looking at.
I love
And
that terminology, the continuum terminology, because I do think it is a connector of more professions,
mhm,
but it also helps people understand that they don't really have to, step out of the realm of what they're doing that much when there's an injury.
mhm,
We just basically use the injury, the pain as feedback for what they're currently ready for, as opposed to looking at it as like you said, it's like it doesn't have to be okay, like I'm switching off my fitness and I'm going into physical therapy mode. It's
right.
really just like an understanding of where does this new symptom fit in. And that now that I'm in a kind of a business where it's a blend of training and physical therapy, I find like the only thing that like holds my physical therapy education apart is when pain is involved. I'm more comfortable with it than maybe somebody who isn't used to treating pain. But
Right.
the actual presentation of what the session looks like looks still very much like a training session, a fitness training session that we're aware of pain, we're educating on pain, but we're trying our best to not take somebody out of what they were already doing. We're limiting them as little as possible with what their symptoms allow. And that's
Mhm,
that's a very different thing than when somebody is now has to go and be referred to a physical therapist and they sort of have to like feel like they have to start from scratch as
mhm,
opposed to connecting it to what they're already doing. And I think that having that knowledge on both sides, where it's like, strength and conditioning, pain, you understand pain, pain doesn't freak you out as a professional.
yep.
You're able to connect those dots as much as possible. And I really think it keeps you in the game so you don't have to be as long out of the game. And then it makes it that the rehab process is quicker, but it almost doesn't even appear like a rehab process.
Absolutely. So I think you could walk into a room with there's chiropractors that treat exactly like we do, and there's
Hmm.
trainers that train like we do. And you could walk in a room and not be able to tell the difference between John, Chris, the chiropractor, and the trainer, right? So I think when you bring it back full circle to like to how we know if it's a good professional or not, like you said, you can tell by a lot of the courses that they've taken, but then we can also tell by okay, we can walk into a room and kind of watch them train, and they're thinking on principles again, principles and movement patterns, and they're working on position. And I think that's how you can really tell. And if the person's being attentive to you, like if you walk into a
Right.
physical therapy clinic and there's not a ton of attention to the people on the table, like that's a red flag as well,
Absolutely.
right? So we're not necessarily a one-on-one clinic, but we see a lot of one-on-one, and our space is small enough where if someone's doing manual therapy on someone, they can cue the other person, or similar to a small group personal training model. Like I don't think one-on-one, well, one-on-one in our practice isn't the standard of care we look to achieve because I think you can still queue in a small group training where there's two
Really?
people, like you can 100% still queue effectively to make sure you're getting change, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the max that we'll have in a clinic at one time per therapist is maybe two people. If there's overlap, there might be three, but even still, if there's a little bit of overlap because someone stays in our clinic for an hour and a half, like all these trainers are going to small group training models and they're not sacrificing the results. So
Right.
I think you can still queue very effectively with an attentive coach with a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 model versus a lot of clinics they're not giving attention to someone on a table and you'll see someone stretch for 5 minutes and then they'll sit there and wait until the therapist comes back around and it's not the most effective use of time.
Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
it's like, what is the intention of the professional, right? So like, I think there's three broad categories you can look at it. Are you a supervisor? You're just watching somebody do what you're telling them to do. Are you a motivator, which you know that that kind of is the stereotype of the trainer a lot of times, or just you're yelling at someone to work harder, or are
Yep.
you an educator? So I would want, if I was having one of my relatives go seek out a movement professional, I'd want someone that was an educator. And I
Mhm.
think nowadays you can actually seek that out pretty easily if somebody just does a little bit of content to market themselves. Like you can just hear what their thought process is around movement. So this is where I find like social media or podcasting, like YouTube stuff nowadays, that kind of content is free to do, but it's a resume for someone that maybe or across the country, someone's never met you, but you can get a sense of what their knowledge base is and how they might educate someone that you care about that you'd be sending their way.
Mhm.
But I'm looking, at professionally, I want to be an educator for people more than I want to be a motivator. But I hopefully education becomes motivation, right? As
Mhm.
you understand the why a little bit more, you may decide, okay, it makes more sense for me to do that. But I
Mhm.
think, you and I both like the clientele that we might see, oftentimes like the clientele I see is very, very successful.
Mhm.
They're not going to get motivated by somebody that's in theoretically a lesser part of the social structure than them. They're already quite successful. Now they may respect my education in the domain that they're coming from. So I have to be very careful that I'm not trying to over motivate from a perspective of like I'm standing up here and they're down there. It's more of just this is what I know. This is where the gaps might need to be filled from an education standpoint. And then hopefully they're educated enough that they once they see the why, that will be the motivation that they need to move forward. But that's absolutely something I think it makes a good movement professional. And you tend to see that with more experience, is that you gain more ability to educate. You also see what doesn't work, right? Early on, it might be all you have is to motivate somebody, right?
Mhm.
Because you don't have a lot that you're working with from an education standpoint, but you see it not work. You see the motivation just, it's like you're running into a wall with what you're saying to people. They're not changing until you realize like that wasn't the way to go. That wasn't the way to communicate. And maybe the way to communicate is you have to know a little bit more so you can explain it in a subtly different way. And then that starts to move somebody forward. But that I
Yeah.
think is a big distinction.
100%. Like, I think you would probably agree. Like, my early stages of training people when I was 22, right out of college, like, it looks like crap.
Yeah,
That wasn't good. I was a motivator. I was
right.
throwing extra, I was, if I gave someone a good workout by giving them a ton of burpees and, they were tired, so tired they couldn't move at the end, like, that's what I thought doing a good job was. And now,
Yep.
and as I've educated myself now, it's 2006, so like almost 20 years into it, like
Hmm.
it just looks completely different, right? And I think we're finding these, like we're even finding young professionals that are coming out, and you need reps.
Right.
You need reps, and it's okay as long as you're growing and learning. And we were just talking before we got on, like even just both owning our businesses and the mistakes that we've made to find out what our businesses are, or
Right.
how the direction we should take them. I think it's all you just part of what you want to see in a professional to seek out is that they're learning and growing, and it's all just part of the process. And even programs that we both wrote a year ago, I'm sure they're looking completely different, or there's things we would do differently to get better outcomes. And since you and I are always kind of assessing things, like we just have to be careful not to beat ourselves up about it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and I think that was a question I was going to ask like specifically in the last, decade or so. can you think of, one, two things that you've really changed your mind about that, things you used to be doing that you were really convinced that were the way to go and that totally you've done a 180 on?
Ooh, a 180.
Or just made some substantial change in your thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, and I've heard this before from people who've been in, doing what we're doing for a long time is like I go back to the fundamentals now more than everything. Like I've taken
Hmm.
all the complicated courses, right?
Right.
But I still think like in our practice, we see a lot of tendinopathy. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of just specific progressive overload principles to get the tendon to adapt to load, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think now I'm focused more on position more than I ever have been to make sure that the load is appropriate and setting them up to be successful for years and years and years moving forward.
Hmm.
Um, but I think I've played with all the super complicated things where you have to get this muscle to activate this muscle and do this and find this position. But it's more of like, okay, how can I get the change as fast as I can with exercises that people are most familiar with, but kind of taking into account better position while loading the tendon directly or
Right.
so I think it's um I've gotten more I've focused more on the fundamentals with little tweaks from things I've done taken from courses through the years
Hmm.
instead of overcomplicating rehab.
Yes.
But I think we hear continuously is what to understand, you'll have to help me here, but to show that you're an expert, you have to be able to explain things to a baby. There's
Right,
something
right,
like that,
right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that still confuses a lot of the new grads and the students that we see because it looks so simple to them, but they don't see the 3 or 4 steps, like a split squat to a student. A split
Hmm.
squat's a split squat.
Right.
But if you take a split squat and you get a little bit, you shorten your stance a little bit, you get them to orient their pelvis a little bit different way. Like you completely change how the split squat's working and what you're affecting. And the the uneducated person doesn't see those little intricacies, but we just make it look easy because we've been doing it for so
Right.
long, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's also the learning more, right? And this is one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I feel I've had to kind of put the brakes on a little bit is as you learn something, like it actually is more entertaining to go take a continuing education course, like once you're a professional, because you can use it right away versus like when you're in school, it just sort of feels like the monotony of going to class. But like
Mm-hmm.
when you're taking a weekend course, it's like, oh, I'm visualizing a patient I can use this with right away. So you get excited about it.
Yep.
And I think there's a difference between learning something new and knowing when to use that new thing, and just feeling like, okay, you're loaded with this arsenal of information, but experience allows you to get to a sense of like this person's not ready for this new information yet. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even ready to teach it yet, but that you have to like sort of hold it for when the time comes. And that's one of the things that I've definitely changed my mind about a little bit is how much I feel it's appropriate to cue and how much is just allowing people to do their thing and almost responding more to a question than
Mm-hmm.
trying to be the leader of what they're doing at all times. And I think it might be different because I see people more frequently in a different capacity than I did when I was working more as a clinical therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, a lot of times I'm just trying to focus on like let's have a good positive experience with movement, as
Mm-hmm.
Craig Levinson says, right? Just
Yeah.
to, allow people to go through a process. And then if an issue arises in their mind subjectively, or if I see something that's changed or is unsafe, then I have some type of standard for stepping in. But otherwise, it's sort of let the process unfold. Because again, if we're trying to build fitness over time, and fitness can be also very much related to somebody's ability to perceive a good position or a different position than they're used to, it may be that we need more time
Mm-hmm.
that any cue, if I'm over cueing, I haven't given this person enough time for them to figure it out on their own. But that doesn't take away from the value of the knowledge that you gained. It's just that, okay, I have to be a little bit more, I have to think about when I use it a little bit more.
It's so funny you brought up queuing. That's something I've probably come around 180 is I barely queue anymore. Like
Yeah,
maybe it's like one cue walk away and let them self orient and let
right.
them like figure it out because I think people learn the best when they can figure things out themselves.
100%. Yeah.
So I'm 100% queuing a lot less than I did when I was a young clinician and a young trainer.
Yeah.
Like it's one or two cues, don't overwhelm them. A lot of what we deal with is what it's either increasing capacity because people are just they're not really moving well and they're not moving at all,
Hmm.
or it's managing volume because they're doing too much,
Right.
right? So then it's like orienting a person in this specific in a position, and this your cue, go do 3 sets of 10 of this. And I'll kind of watch. I won't be there to over cue. We'll have a
Hmm.
discussion. But it's and then from there, it's okay to fail with going back to your point about the courses. It's okay to fail in a low risk environment because you're learning, both you and the patient are learning from that,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. And I
yeah,
think
and
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and then you cue them as needed. Like
Yeah.
if it's you give them the cue, they do the exercise, and then it's like, okay, well, why don't you try this position now, or
Right.
try to get this a little bit more? But that's it. It's like a low. It almost seems nonchalant, and I think,
Hmm.
and sometimes I think I come across that way as like nonchalant in
Yeah.
in the rehab process, but it's really just like I'm not trying to be overbearing in my cues, and I want people to learn and find and feel positions and patterns and movement. Now there are times where there's a specific patient where I need to get into the nitty gritty, and I'm like, you
Hmm.
need to do this with this and shift this and get here, right? But there's a lot of times where it's just, you know what, try this position, see if that changes your movement. Um, and then we tweak as needed. But it's like
Absolutely.
it's funny you brought that up because I'm not queuing as much. I've come around on that, and it's less important in my practice than it used to be.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be the current trend in continuing education is that we're sort of respecting the biopsycho the psychosocial element
Mm-hmm.
of getting people to move and just in health in general, right? So there is sort of like knowing what you should do, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
the act of actually being able to do it. And we all struggle that in with that in our own ways. So just explaining more of what you should do is not necessarily helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So appreciating that, especially with movement, that because we know something and we felt it, we almost will forget the process that we went through to get to the point that we're at. And I think, like, I wouldn't have wanted somebody to be cueing me very frequently when I'm learning something new because I expect that I'm going to screw up. And I think the more cueing I get, the less likely I'm going to want to make those errors, which then I can eventually fix. And then that ultimately aids in the learning process. But I'm finding more of those continuing education sections showing up within physical therapy, within movement, is like how to teach somebody how to learn movement better. And it
Mm-hmm.
isn't frequency of cueing. It seems to be like just an experience of like communication becomes the key and it has to be person dependent. So
Yep.
like if we're going to get in the weeds, which we can do at any moment with people, you usually also have a relationship with that person where you know that they're ready for that conversation and they kind of want that conversation, right? Versus somebody who has really no interest in that conversation the first time you see that, that's going
Mm-hmm.
to be overwhelming. And like that's where I think experience comes. Is like you've made that mistake. I know I've made that mistake where I've tried to get in the weeds too quickly with somebody that's not what they're ready for, and it doesn't help, right? Like because
Mm-hmm.
they're going into the process with skepticism and like confusion, and you're expecting some type of change, but if they're already like not buying into the process, then you're going to get effects that aren't as useful. So it's knowing like where to be with people at different times, but it ultimately fits with the science of motor learning and how people learn the best is they actually have to screw up. They just have to screw up in a way that is safe. Yeah, so I think it's just
Yep.
like putting these little barriers of safety around people and then just letting them do their things and hopefully they're consistent enough that with consistency everything tends to improve.
Absolutely. And you're just trying to set the person up for success. And
Exactly.
in turn, if you set them up for success, you'll be successful.
Right.
Right. So you don't want to breed this environment of failure because you're going to lose them. They're going to feel defeated. And ultimately, they may just leave.
Right.
So it all just it filters down to how can we set this person up to be successful to make sure that they're getting everything they need from the session. right? And being egoless as practitioners to
Hmm.
not guide them into what we want for them, right?
Exactly.
But understand it's like it's a process where consistency very like some we both have, I'm sure, these like one and done people where they're in a lot of pain. We get them out of pain and they're gone. But for most of our people, there's this process and lifestyle change that we need to make sure that through all the different realms of exercise prescription and um, communication that we're setting them up to be successful.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things I've noticed is like that I have a lot of clients now that are like I'm seeing them whether they're in pain or not, right?
Mhm.
So if there is an episode of pain and we have that experience where like you make a change in one session that is favorable, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But like in a physical therapy clinic, a lot of times you might not see that person again. You have no idea like if that symptom came back, you don't really know like what their long-term, prognosis was with the change that was made. What I like to see now with my clients is like when I make those changes, I haven't like done anything magical. It's just, like I've maybe manipulated the nervous system in a way, but maybe a month or so, 2 months later, like that symptom comes back. So there does ultimately have to be an educational process that that basically sinks in for the client. It can't just be like a technique or something that we do to help someone. Now we can start to discuss it like why did this help? Like why are some of the things that we're doing, why do they make quick change? And how can you try to emulate this yourself? But
Mhm.
ultimately, there does have to be an education process that the longer something is spread out ties into some of the quick changes that are being made from a physical therapy perspective. But I think in a lot of like traditional physical therapy clinics, you never get to see that long term. Someone might not come back, or you just you don't get a follow up to see the ebbs and flows in symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the last couple questions I was thinking of, and this is something I've just been really thinking of lately. We've taken a lot of the same type of continuing education courses. We've had similar mentors, I think, over the years.
Mhm.
But is there something that you have really kind of resonated with mentors over the years, like people that have helped you grow, that and maybe it's the content, but just the type of person that kind of gets the best out of you. And then
Mhm.
conversely, somebody who maybe they even were very smart and gave you good information, but their teaching style actually was detrimental to your growth.
Yeah. What I've still had mentors who like were just always questioning, right? Like
Hmm.
they're always looking to kind of change the standard. And this is in both strength and conditioning and physical therapy. And a lot of the mentors I have kind of meld those two worlds together because they they live in both worlds,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, like the guy that I really looked up to when we were both in school was Charlie Weingroff. Like
Hmm.
he was the first guy I feel like that really melded the two worlds and kind of talked about the movement continuums and patterns. And it's not PT and strength and conditioning exercise, it's all just exercise and where did people plug and play, right?
Right.
And he was a guy that he would have discussions with you, but he was very knowledgeable where he would just say like he would tell you how it is, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes in an abrasive way, but he would have those discussions. And then there's like Bill Hartman, who was a big mentor, is a big mentor, and it's same thing. It's like they're melding these two worlds of strength and conditioning together with physical therapy, and but it's always kind of asking how I can do better,
Right.
and what is if we challenged him and found something. Well, hey, Bill or Charlie, what do you think about this?
Right.
Like these discussions happen where, oh, you're right, John and Chris. Like we should think about it this way, or you know what? In my research, I found that this is how it could be a better outcome. And then you practice and you play with it, and either side makes the change that they need to, right?
Yeah.
And then like guys like Gray Cook, where again, it's like melding those worlds of strength and conditioning. But I think these people, even with you see with FMS and SFMA, like they tried to create this common language movement system to bridge the gap between physical therapy and strength and conditioning and a common language. They researched it for 20 years. They found that it didn't really create what they wanted to, but it still gives a good outline where you're like, okay, these movement professionals are thinking in this way. and maybe it's not doing what we thought it would do in predicting injury as well as we thought it would, but it's still a great way to start an assessment and start to help people to find this common ground of movement as medicine,
Right.
right? So I think what I've looked for in like those mentors is it's who's kind of living in both worlds of strength and conditioning and physical therapy and looking at it in a movement based approach, right?
Hmm.
And who will have well educated discussions when challenged because they're just trying to find the best ways to do things. And it's not so myopic in like it's my way or no way,
Right.
right?
I think that's
You
key. Yeah.
know, and so I like the people that I've lost interest in are people that are so research evidence based that they
Hmm.
lose the bigger picture. Like
Right.
evidence and not understanding evidence based practice is, the subjective things, experience, research, all these different things. And when they start to have, well, the research says this, well, I understand the research says that, but I've also seen this in practice and this has worked really well for me. So I'm using research and healing principles as maybe my foundation.
Right.
But then there's also the 20 years of practice that I've seen where this also happens. And it's
Right.
hard to research that because it's hard to research when you're bringing everything together with the nutrition and the neuro and the physical. It's hard to eliminate all the variables.
Right.
So the mentors that I've found that I've kind of lost touch with and haven't really pursued, education from them are the people that are like so research focused that they won't have a discussion any other way. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure you've seen those people too.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. I think,
yeah.
what that boils down to me and like, cause I'm right on the same page with you there is especially when I was younger as a clinician, I was looking for that system that blended, fitness and rehab. So
Mm-hmm.
anything that did that, I was on board with, and I learned a lot from that. I find that as I'm, later in my career now, the number one thing I look for is a respect for uncertainty, right?
Yep.
So, and that speaks to the idea of ego, but also that, somebody is pushing their method as the be all end all. They're going to lose me pretty quick,
Mm-hmm.
but because I'm sure I can still learn from it, but I want to find the common threads with that, with all the other things that I've learned, as opposed to throw away everything I've learned for this new method. And the teaching model there has to be open. And I think judgment plays a huge role in that for me. So I could hear judgment pretty quickly in somebody's tone when they're using somebody else's model, like berating somebody else's model to lift up their own model.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely doesn't resonate anymore. It maybe did a little bit more just because I was learning something new when I was a little bit younger, but right now that's sort of like doesn't even get me through the front door if I hear a lot of that. I
Yeah.
think the other major thing is like, and I had this experience just once working for somebody else, whereas I was actually learning a lot from these individuals, but I was getting the sense that everything they were teaching me, I was behind. And they were making me feel I was behind constantly. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter how much experience you haven't learned what we know yet. Not thinking what I already did learn that they don't know yet, right? It was always just like, here is this sort of, like pinhole of what we know, and this is all there is to know.
Yep.
And because you're learning from us right now, you're behind. And that made me not want to go to work. It made me like feel like anything that I had learned already again was to be thrown out, and I was behind. So I
Mm-hmm.
think like you have to be careful because I think sometimes that can come from people that are actually quite intelligent. They're teaching you something that is useful to learn, but if they're making you feel constantly less than because you're learning from them, like of course you're not going to know what they're teaching you because they're teaching it to you. But
Right.
if they sort of make you forget all the other stuff you do know and what you can bring to the table, again, it sort of squashes that idea of they don't have a respect for uncertainty because they think that what they're teaching you is certainly correct,
Mm-hmm.
and that there might be another way, and that you're bringing something to the table with what you already do know. I think that's something that I've just been contemplating this now as I'm getting older, and trying. I have people that I have to teach. It's just like I never want to be that, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it might happen, right? Like if you
Yeah.
know a lot more than the person that you're coming in, like you might do that unintentionally. But that's one of the things that I would run away from quite a bit right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you just want someone that's open to discussion and whether you're a new grad or a seasoned clinician, like I'm always going to talk to people like I could learn something. Like part
Right.
of that's why I stay teaching in university because like those students challenge me to make sure I'm on top of my game, right?
Yeah.
Um, so and you can learn like if one of those students has a different experience and movement than I have, like they were a strength coach at a Penn State football before going to PT school, like they're going to teach me something. Like
Yep.
I've never been in a D1 football strength and
Right.
conditioning weight room, right? But I'm going to learn something from the 22-year-old who spent time there. Even though I'm teaching them in PT school, they're going to teach me something on the strength and conditioning side, or at
100%.
least how they run a program. There's a million things they could teach me from that experience. So I think it just like the mentors that I've run away from are just people that they're not open to learning, right?
Yep.
Because yeah,
Perfect. Anything you're excited about in the future in our field that's coming down the pipeline?
I don't know, Chris. Like I don't know. I
Not really.
like I'm trying. We need to talk about this outside of here, but like I'm struggling to find the next Con Ed thing and what's
Mm,
going to really be profound to changing my practice. And I think I've gone more towards just as a business owner, like understanding business practices and leadership
yeah.
practices and system learning systems. And it's funny where we both went through the stage of the first 10 years of practice where we were doing everything. Like
Yeah.
a lot of our contacts are because we took so many continuing education classes and a lot of things suffer, like family suffers and business suffers. And now I think as we're now established in business, it's shifted for me into like how do I make sure with people relying on me that
Right.
I can set up the best work environment through making a better business for them.
Yeah.
um, so I'm still keeping up on the research and the different, but we've also taken every single thing that's out there that we
Right.
feel like is, so are we retaking those? And there's still people that we follow that we learn from, right?
hmm
But there's not a specific continuing education course in philosophy that I'm really like chomping at the bit to get to right now.
Yeah.
Because I think it's more in leadership and business, and then reaching out to those mentors, some of those mentors that we talked about, and just having discussions with them,
Yeah.
right? Not necessarily taking a course, but like calling Bill and having an hour discussion with them. I'll learn
Right.
more in that hour than I will from a whole, you know, 16-hour course over a weekend.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think like seeking out like the direct content, via Zoom or like if you could do that, you'll
Mm-hmm.
get so much more out of that than taking a weekend, whenever that's possible. I think
But
even if it's more expensive, it's like it's totally worth it.
but I think it's just stages of practice, though. I think there's
Hmm.
still a lot of value for a young clinician to go to those courses and network, if
No
anything,
doubt.
right?
Yeah.
Like form those connections, learn in that group atmosphere because you can try things in the breakout sessions, and then as you get older and you find the people you really look up to, then maybe you can pay for an hour with them.
Yeah.
So I think it's like stages of practice too. Like we wouldn't be where we are if we didn't do
Right.
those weekend courses and met the people that we did.
Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
finally letting go of some of the certifications when they're up for research. It's just like, what's the point after a while?
Yeah.
Actually, like I let go of my CSCS after all this time, where it's
Yeah.
just like, what's the point at this point? You know what I mean? Like it's not really a marketing chip for me anymore.
Yeah.
So but that's one thing where it's, yeah, we did a lot all up front, and now you can't take that knowledge away. But
Yeah.
I think if I'm doing anything with continuing education, what I find I'm drawn to is more of the behavioral and psychological side of things. Like I just did a motivational interviewing course online, and there's more stuff that you can, dip a toe into because you can do it online. You don't have to commit to
Yep.
a whole weekend. But that I feel like was the most helpful thing I've done in like the last 5 years, just because it was definitely very different than my thought process.
Mhm.
And I think getting into almost like a different field, but we're working with people, we have to communicate. There's
Oh
no
yeah.
way we're not dealing with psychology, but trying to get people that are professionals in that field just to understand how they think about things, how they systematize things. It's not exactly the same thing because they have different sessions, but it definitely makes me think differently. And I feel like that's a realm where I'm going to look more into.
Mhm.
The other thing I'm excited about is just easier ability to monitor fitness and monitor health, right? Like
Hmm.
that's getting better and better. And I feel like that technology is going to continue to improve because when people can monitor things in real time, I feel like that's the connection to motivation and education right there that goes
Hmm.
way beyond like what we can say to someone. It's just getting someone to like monitor a heart rate, monitor blood pressure, monitor like blood sugar. You just start to like some of the stuff that's being told to you gets to make more sense in real time. So I
Yeah,
think the more like real time the feedback gets for health metrics, the better that makes everything, right? The easier it
yeah,
makes what we do, the easier it makes just people to not need us either. And ultimately that's a good thing for
yeah.
health.
Yeah, I think you just have to be careful there of like the paralysis by analysis, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah.
Because you could get into like a good example is like the Whoop and HRV,
Hmm.
and it's telling you, you know, today's not a good day to push it hard because you're in the red, but you're like, but
Right.
I feel really good. I want to push it
Hmm.
hard,
Right.
and there's the question: do you follow the Whoop and what it's telling you, or you just follow kind of your gut? So,
Right.
I don't disagree with you, but I think it's also being careful. And some people love the analysis and the numbers, but I
Right.
also see patients. I have one right now that's like paralyzed by
Yeah.
he has everything. He has the Whoop, the
Hmm.
aura, the this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, no, just move.
Right.
Just go do it and listen to your body. Like, don't worry about the numbers for now.
Right.
But he's someone that's like almost paralyzed by like
Sure.
too many numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But it drives like a different conversation that wouldn't be there otherwise. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had a bit of that, and I think it's just that becomes part of our continuing education too, is like understanding these tools and being able to give more context that ultimately helps to like calm some of that anxiety down around
Yeah.
it, where it's like, no, here, like it's never going to be like exact, like this is how you use it. This is not how it's meant to be used, right? I think some of those conversations come up, and I don't know if you follow Joel Jameson, and have
Mm-hmm.
you done some work with him, right? So I think he speaks like really well about this, and he's created his own product, but he also talks about like how not to use it, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
don't take what you get here. Like there always needs to be context around these numbers. But I just think that that's even part of the education that wouldn't have been there 5 years ago because we weren't respecting these tools anyways as being accurate, but now they're getting a little bit more accurate. But now we have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have the education to interpret them for people. But
Absolutely.
I'm excited about that becoming an easier process, right? Like it's more affordable, step one, and then it becomes continuously more accurate, which is also quite important. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it does open up a conversation in the clinic or in the gym that wouldn't have been there, and I feel like okay, now it's actually creates a better structure to what we're trying to do, depending on the intent.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, man, it was great catching up. We have to do this absolutely more often. We always say that, but
Yeah.
like then we're busy humans. But we
Yeah.
will make a point to be in touch more often. Keep killing it. And thanks for coming on.